Hands up anyone in the audience who wants to get Alzheimer's disease. All right, hands up anyone in the audience who think there is some age at which they will want to get Alzheimer's disease. There's a hand over there. Okay, what age? What age? All right, there's someone in the audience who wants to get Alzheimer's disease at about 80. What do you all think of that? Anyone else? Any other takers? All right. You seem to be in a minority, madam. Now, in general, I don't come across people who want to get sick, however old they get. But yet, it's very curious, an awful lot of people seem to think that aging is all right. And they don't want to live to be 200, even if they're in really good health. Now, what the hell's that about? I mean, how much of what you actually do, how much of the way you decide what to do comes down to how long ago you were born? You know, it's actually all about your health, how long you expect to live. It's all about the future. It's not about the past at all. So it makes no sense that one would have some kind of idea of how long you want to live. You know, it's like having an opinion about what time you want to go to the toilet next Tuesday. You know, we don't have opinions about that sort of thing because we know we're going to have better information on the topic nearer the time. Right? It's exactly the same with aging. So here I am today, and I'm going to tell you to grow up and think properly about aging. I mean, of course, I haven't exactly canvassed opinion as to anyone in the audience who does want to die at the age of 200, but I'm just speaking from extensive past experience that most people don't like the idea of living significantly longer than their parents did. It's very odd, but that's what people are like. So I'm going to be explaining why that's a silly way to think, but I'm going to do it in the context of science, because I'm a biologist. I work on actually making the medical control of aging a reality, bringing the diseases and disabilities of old age to an end in just the same way that medical science has in the past 100 or 200 years brought pretty much all of the major infectious diseases that used to kill so many people to an end, at least in the industrialized world. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. I won't get terribly technical because I know most of you are not scientists, but I'll tell you enough so that you can realize that this is real. And then I'll talk a little bit more about why you ought to care and what you ought to do about it. A lot of us are living longer than what we used to. And this, of course, is a great cause for celebration, that hardly anyone dies in infancy anymore, hardly anyone dies in childbirth. But the fact is, the solution of that problem has created a new problem, namely this epidemic of age-related diseases and disabilities, which kill people, but they kill people really slowly as compared to diphtheria and tuberculosis and so on. So there's a great deal of expense, which is what's illustrated here. This is just statistics from America because it was easy to get hold of. This is the growth of the US economy over the past 50 years. This is the growth of medical expenditure in the same period, and this is one divided by the other. It's gone up from 5% of the economy to 18% in just 50 years. That's quite a big deal. And of course, as probably all of you know, it's bringing lots of crises in terms of not only medical expenditure, but also pensions and so on and so forth. We've got to figure out a way to do something about that. It's strange, if you think about it, that this dichotomy exists, that we've been so successful against all of the infectious diseases that were so prevalent in the past by relatively simple means, but yet these diseases of old age are still with us, and we've made very little progress against them. And the reason is because these diseases and disabilities are a side effect of being alive in the first place. And curing being alive in the first place is not a good idea. So, because ultimately it's all this, right? You know, aging is the lifelong accumulation of damage. Aging of the human body is no different at the end of the day than aging of a car or an aeroplane. Any machine with moving parts is going to do damage to itself as a side effect of its normal operation, even starting from when it was built, or in our case, when we were conceived, okay? And that damage is going to accumulate over time, such that eventually the doors fall off, or your heart stops working, or whatever. So, of course, this damage is harmless for a long time, both in the case of a car and in the case of the human body, but only for a finite amount of time. So the bizarrely underappreciated truth that I want to highlight here is that aging itself, therefore, should not be viewed as something separate from disease. The diseases and disabilities of old age are that way because they are parts of aging. They are part and parcel of aging. And therefore, aging itself is a medical problem. The thing is, though, it's not medically curable in the sense that we can cure an infection by, doing a one-off treatment that will eliminate it from the body and leave you in a non-aging state. No, it's got to be treated in a different way that I'll be explaining in more detail now. So here's what I just said. Metabolism, that means being alive. That's the network of processes that keep us going from one day to the next. It causes damage throughout life, and eventually the damage causes problems. This is what everything that exists in the clinic for the diseases of old age comes down to today, geriatric medicine. Geriatric medicine says, let's bang away at these pathologies and try and get rid of them. In other words, let's completely ignore everything that I told you in the past 5 minutes. All right? Not very clever, and sure enough, it doesn't work. We have made very little progress that way, and we always will only make very little progress that way, simply because it's that this thing here, the cause of these pathologies, is continuing to accumulate, and therefore the treatments are going to become progressively less effective. Now, I'm by no means the first person to point this out. People have been saying this for about a century. Unfortunately, they have come to the wrong alternative conclusion. The alternative conclusion that has been prevalent within the study of the biology of aging is this over here, which basically says, let's intervene right at the beginning, let's try and clean up our metabolism, clean up the way the body works. In other words, let's make it not make damage, or at least make damage more slowly than it normally does. Sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? Not so good if you're already in middle age or older and you've got a lot of damage already. You won't get so much benefit as what you would if you had these treatments starting from childhood, but it's still a good idea in principle. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a problem. In just the same way that the pathologies of old age are rather complex and numerous, you don't have to read this slide, don't worry, that wasn't the intention. Right? This is a list of some of the things that go wrong with people when they get old. Similarly, the process of being alive is also rather complicated and hairy. Any biologists in the audience? Anyone who just studies biology? No, not one biologist. We have fewer biologists. All right, jolly good. All right. So as any biologist will tell you, this is a part of a metabolic chart. It's a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how the body works. And as you can see, it's bloody hairy, and it's completely inconceivable that we would be able to tweak this thing so that it did not do the thing we don't want it to do, namely create damage, while, on the other hand, it would carry on doing all the things we do want it to do, keeping us alive. It's just not going to happen. And that's an understatement of the problem, of course. The real problem is not that this is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how the body works. The real problem is that this is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how the body works, which is completely dwarfed by the totally astronomical amount that we don't know about how the body works. And that's even ignoring all the stuff that we don't even know that we don't know. So it's never going to happen. But luckily, obviously I wouldn't be here if that were the end of my story. So what is the end of my story? Well, basically it's this. We've got a third approach. I'm going to call it the maintenance approach because it's very, very similar, as you will see, to what we do to keep a car going for an unusually long amount of time. The reason why there are cars like this in the world, cars that are 100 years old when they were built only designed to last 10 or 20 years, is because if you do maintenance sufficiently comprehensively on a machine, you can keep the damage at bay. You can repair the damage as fast as it is being accrued by the process as a side effect of the machine's operation, and the car will go on indefinitely. The same ought to be true for the human body as well, in principle, because the human body is, after all, a machine, albeit a really complicated one. We just have to figure it out how to do that maintenance sufficiently comprehensively, and that is what I work on. So, what does it actually mean in practice? What are the nuts and bolts of this? Well, first of all, let us describe the problem in a little bit more specific detail. All I've said so far is it's damage. What the hell is this damage? Well, the big breakthrough that I made about 14 years ago that allowed all of this to take off and allowed Sense Research Foundation, the charity that's been created around my work, to be created and to proceed, was basically that I realized we could classify all of the many, many, many things that we know that accumulate, that qualify as damage by the definition I'm using tonight. We could classify them all into a very manageable number of categories, just these 7 categories. And I haven't got time in these 15 minutes to tell you much about these, but I'll just give us an illustration, just the top one. Cell loss. That's simply cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division and differentiation of other cells, right? Very, very simple concept. It happens. in aging in various organs. Parkinson's disease is caused by exactly this problem. There's a particular part of the brain where cells die at a rather more rapid rate than what they do in most parts of the brain. And if you're unlucky and they die faster than average in that part of the brain, then you get Parkinson's disease. All of these things here are just the same. They're basically, at the molecular or cellular level, they are types of change to the structure and composition of the body, of various organs, that eventually contribute to the ill health of old age. So then the question is, what do we do? Well, first of all, actually, different question. First question is, how can I be so sure that this is an exhaustive classification, that there isn't category number 8 and number 9? Well, here's the first reason. It's been the same classification for over 30 years. All of these things have been studied, have been major topics of study and discussion within gerontology for at least 30 years, sometimes a lot longer. We've come a long way in that time. We really ought to have found new categories in that time if they were there to be found. Now, you could say, well, hang on. Yeah, but you've got to know that you're looking for categories. And that's kind of true. But that's actually also becoming a weak argument, because the fact is I've been giving this list. I've been up here on stage and on camera for over a decade now, challenging my colleagues to come up with number 8 and number 9, and they've not done so. I seem to be getting away with it. So, it's standing the test of time, this characterization of the problem, and that's very, very good news. That really is a reason for optimism, that this may be a paradigm that works. So, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the relationship between these various types of damage that I've mentioned, which may seem rather abstract to you at this point, and the diseases that you know all about and don't want to get, except for that lady over there. So some of the relationships are simple. This one is very simple. There's one of my categories that just says cells that you have too many of because cells are dividing when they're not supposed to. Now that's pretty much the definition of cancer, all right? So nothing clever there, that's all it's about. There we go. Now, that's easy, but most of the cases are not so easy. Heart disease is a great example. Heart disease, lots and lots of things go wrong with your heart when you're old. And they come down to different types of damage. There's something called atherosclerosis, which is the number one killer in the Western world. It's the accumulation of fatty deposits in the artery wall that leads to heart attacks and strokes. And it starts out with white blood cells that are in the artery wall, essentially accumulating molecular garbage, waste products that they can't metabolize. So that's this here, junk inside cells. There's something called arteriosclerosis, which is different. That's to do with the major arteries getting less elastic and being less able to withstand the pulsation from the heartbeat. And that's what causes high blood pressure in the elderly, with all the knock-on effects like kidney failure and so on. That's this one down here, stiffening of this thing called the extracellular matrix. Then there's amyloidosis, which is a little bit similar to Alzheimer's in some ways. It's a type of protein that accumulates in the gaps between the cells in the heart and eventually gums it up. And it turns out that this is the number one cause of death for those of us lucky enough to reach the age of 105 or so. That's this one here. And then finally, there are cells in the heart called pacemaker cells, which are responsible for telling the heart to actually beat. And they get signals from the brain that tell them to do that. And those cells die and they're not replaced as rapidly as they should be. So cell loss also comes into heart disease. Complicated, but explicit. We know all this. This is stuff that we're not making up as we go along. This is stuff that is established, and therefore we can have confidence that if we can deal with these things over here, we've dealt with this thing over here. And that's what this is all about, keeping people healthy. Alzheimer's, same deal. Alzheimer's was first defined over 100 years ago to be the combination of these two things here, a type of molecular garbage inside cells called tangles, and another type outside cells called plaques. And now we know that there's a lot of cell death in the brain during Alzheimer's disease as well, which is not compensated by cell division. Now, the thing is then, what do we do about it? I've told you all about the problem. Of course, I've only told you in very, very top-level terms, but still, you got the idea. What do we do about it? Well, it turns out that the maintenance approach breaks down into a variety of strategies. These ones, basically, replacing things that have gone missing, removing stuff that you don't want, repairing stuff that's got damage, and sometimes reinforcing structures against the damage that they might actually suffer. And it all comes down to complicated stuff like this. This one's not so complicated, this top one. You've all heard of it, stem cell therapy. That's exactly what stem cell therapy is. It's the maintenance approach to fixing cell loss. When cells die and the body doesn't replace them on its own by cell division, we put cells in that are able to divide and transform themselves into the type of cell that went missing, and thereby fix the problem. So I mentioned Parkinson's disease earlier on as a nice simple example of cell loss in aging. Turns out that stem cell therapy is in clinical trials for Parkinson's disease right now, and it's looking very promising. Took a long time to make it work because we had to figure out how to make exactly the right sort of stem cell, but that's pretty much solved now, so that's all going nicely. Most of these other things down here are at a much earlier stage. They're not in the clinic yet. We're working in, petri dishes and in mice sometimes, just to get the thing to a proof of concept, because they're a lot harder. People don't understand the problems well enough. That's why Sense Research Foundation exists, as a charity that is philanthropically funded to do this research. It's pretty credible now. When I started getting up and giving talks like this more than a decade ago, I got a lot of flack, especially from my more grandee colleagues within science, because they said, oh, this guy can't possibly be talking the truth because none of his colleagues thought of this before him, or more or less. But it's not true anymore. This, just by way of illustration, is our research advisory board. All 25 of these people are extremely prominent luminaries in their various fields. So this is now a credible venture, and that's very good news because it does mean that this research is going a lot faster than it was before. People are paying attention to the fact that aging is, number one, a medical problem, not just a natural phenomenon like earthquakes that we might recognize is bad for us, but we don't propose to do anything about them. It's actually a medical problem. Furthermore, it's a tractable medical problem, something that we might actually be able to do something about in the foreseeable future. Here's a list of the things that we ourselves have done recently, publications that came out that document what we've done. This is obviously in the academic literature, just to demonstrate that we're nice and respectable. But ultimately what matters is the fact that the science is moving faster. A lot of people hassle me about things like this. They say, oh dear, where are we going to put all the people? And won't it be only for the rich? And, won't dictators live forever? Well, last I heard, dictator was fairly high on the league table of risky jobs. Won't it be boring, not getting Alzheimer's and being able to remember everything you do? And, how will we pay the pensions? I'm not interested in any of that, because honestly, it's the only reason that anyone can bring up a question like that is because of a completely terminally idiotic lack of sense of proportion. Hello, boys and girls. 2/3 of all deaths worldwide are caused by aging. 100,000 people every single day die of aging. In the industrialized world, it's 90% of all deaths, because not many of us die of malaria and such like. And, of course, it's not just the death, is it? It's the suffering as well. Like I said earlier, aging doesn't tend to kill you very quickly. And so the medical expenditure in the Western world on aging consists of about 90% of medical expenditure total. It's just an extraordinarily huge problem. And even if we did create a certain amount of turbulence and have to restructure some aspects of society as a result of eliminating the ill health of old age, so the hell what? Have a sense of proportion is what I say. This is what you should be thinking about. No age-related ill health. No one gets Alzheimer's. No one gets cardiovascular disease and so on. The elderly actually don't just suck up pensions anymore. They contribute wealth to society so everyone can work less and be richer. The elderly will have the energy to actually carry on enjoying life when they get bored and thinking of something new to do, the way young people do. You can have a flexible, you can work for 40 years and then retire for 20 years and then go back to work and be a rock star for the next 40 years. And this is the most important one for a lot of old people. When I speak to old people, the single thing they're most petrified of in terms of getting sick is that they're going to be a burden on their kids. And of course, they usually are. The fact is that most people in middle age end up being less productive than they otherwise would because they're having to look after their elderly parents. It would be nice if that didn't have to happen anymore. So this afternoon I gave a TEDx talk in Cambridge. I wasn't allowed to say, please give me money, because you're not allowed to say that at TED. But the fact is, medical research costs a lot. We are a charity for a reason. So give me your fucking money and we'll get the research done faster. This is our website. And, you know, we've got, obviously, anyone who wants to get into this technically is very welcome. We have an educational arm in our foundation. We have, obviously, lots of advice that we give people about what areas of research to get into. But mainly, it's all about advocacy. It's all about changing humanity's mindset, getting people to understand that we have an epidemic right now that we've all got. You've all got aging. You're all going to die of it fairly soon, unless something is done about it. So help me do something about it. That's what this is all about. We happen to have those of you who might be in America over the summer, we have a conference in California where the foundation is based in August, so that's just a little advert for that. And then there's this book that I wrote a few years ago. It's actually about 7 or 8 years old now, so you'd think it might be a bit out of date, but actually not. It's relatively up to date still, not because nothing's happened. We've made great progress, but rather because what's happened is pretty much exactly what we predicted would happen. The progress that's been made is along the directions that we were expecting and hoping. So that, again, is a demonstration that the paradigm that we're working on is standing the test of time. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.